There's been praise from the White House for the governor of California, for the mayors, and for what they're doing. How well equipped is California, which seems to be on a leading edge of some of this?
Well, I believe our governor and our mayors are doing a very good job. First of all, there is a message of social isolation. The bars are shut down. The restaurants are shut down. But second, Google, as you know, is doing testing in the Bay Area. So we're working on a technology solution, and we're working on telehealth so that people don't have to go to the hospitals. They can actually see doctors before they're overcrowding hospitals. So it's a comprehensive approach.
But how do we answer the question of how backed up the tests are? Because Governor DeWine said, you know, there could be 100,000 cases here in Ohio, and that's just modeling based on not knowing.
Absolutely.
And we don't know until more people are tested. As of Friday, I think it was 23,000 or 25,000 tests nationally.
Well, Andrea, then this is the problem. I mean, first, why we have not accepted the World Health Organization's tests that every other country has had is mind-boggling. We should have accepted them months ago. And then let's see what the administration's saying. They're saying that 500,000 tests are going to be available. I hope that's right. We haven't seen that yet. I'm waiting for Walmart and CVS and others to have these tests. But that is the biggest roadblock in this entire pandemic.
Online learning really started before MIT and edX. I think it was Coursera at Stanford.
Yes.
Was really the initiator of this. And you
know the Valley.
I know the Valley a little bit, not as well as you. And I also know that you were, when you first got into Congress, you were proposing all sorts of code teaching to Appalachian coal miners who are losing their jobs, industry transfers, working with Kentucky. So you've been an innovator in this. What more can people like you in Congress do?
I think the biggest thing is to engage technology communities on telehealth medicine. And we've called for the National Federal Health Telecenter so that it's a coordinated response, so that if you're sick, you don't just show up to a doctor or a hospital. You actually can have some of the treatment be done online. You can then go to a testing site if you need to, and then only have the most critical folks actually use our resources. That would save a lot of lives, and it wouldn't burden our healthcare facilities.
Well, it's great to have people like you in Congress. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Andrea.
Congressman Khanna, and coming up, lockdown.
So that was a clip of Roe addressing the virus, and he's been making the rounds on TV. I would say the thing that stuck out the most to me is when he mentions, and you might have missed it, so I wrote it down, that the U.S. has not accepted the World Health Organization test that other countries have. And it's just another example of how the United States is this really... its leadership is just weird. You know, when we pulled out of the Paris agreements almost 3 years ago, we became one of 3 countries in the entire world that weren't part of that. And I remember how I was so frustrated because you had these conservatives who were like, yeah, I agree with Trump, it's a bad deal for the US. And I was like, do you really believe over 100 countries all got in a little room and said, we're going to collab to make the U.S. Lose coins while the rest of us... You know, just weird. But no, where he mentions the need for coordinated assistance, he's correct, because as I've said before, the United States healthcare system is basically a massive joke that is really inexcusable. And when you have people who are rushing to get aid and blocking others who have more severe cases, it can lead to more demises. She also mentioned that Roe has a background in tech, which is correct. That was his, I would say of any of the positions he has that I think don't get really mentioned ever at all, it definitely has to do with that. He is I'd say outside of Yang, he's probably the Democrat I most associate with, you know, innovation and manufacturing and just things that have some kind of futuristic labeling toward them, you know, automation and whatnot. So the fact that she mentioned that was nice. But no, it's a global crisis that the United States is dealing with in a, I'd say locally pretty effective way. And when I say that, understand, I do not like Newsom in the slightest. California has a reputation of picking very horrible governors. We've had nothing but trash since probably the first Governor Brown, so not Jerry Brown, but his father. And I could say the same thing for Garcetti and for the rest of these people that, just within these different cities. But I will say that they really haven't done anything I'm opposed to. They're not doing anything particularly special, but the basic competence of saying, hey, this thing spreads like crazy, especially when you're around each other. Therefore, we're going to ask you to shelter in place, I think is a good idea. But again, it's not because they're doing something spectacular. And his response there was appropriate because on Twitter, you have people who are putting Kumo for president, some crazy crap. God, there was a tweet by someone, I can't remember their name, but I did thumb it up or put a heart. And they were saying that Americans have this thing where if you give them a boogeyman, then you give them a boogeyman who's not as bad, or whose issues they have an easier time ignoring, they'll embrace that other boogeyman. And it was nice to see people linking all the little horrible stuff that these different politicians have done, so that we don't forget that just because they're handling this crisis effectively or at least decently, that it's not, there's not a dark past with that particular person. So this is a good interview, and he's been making the rounds on these shows, and he has a good idea that I just wish more people would pay attention to.